Hello everyone, so far my 31 Nights of Horror series and in the history of my movie review channel, I've never really reviewed movies before the 60s, and today I'm going to go back in time to 1932 to talk about one of the first horror and vampire movies, Vampyr. The synopsis goes as follows. After Alan Gray rents a room near Vampyr, France, strange events unfold. An elderly man leaves a packet on Gray's table, and shadows that are seemingly alive lead him toward a castle. At a nearby manor, he witnesses the same man being murdered and gradually learns about the curse of the vampire. As Gray faces the horrors of the castle, he attempts to save the victim's daughters, one of whom, Leon, has fallen ill after mysteriously being bitten. This video essay is going to just tackle how Vampyr evokes images of terror and how it was also one of the first of its kind and how it's inspired many modern horror movies today, and I'm just excited to dive into all of this. Vampyr is a movie that I personally didn't really find that amusing the first time I saw it. I would actually even go to say that I thought it was pretty okay. I didn't really get the hype. I saw this for one of my film classes, and then I decided to rewatch it when I had to write a paper on this movie, and I honestly really liked it. I still don't think it's a perfect movie, but I think there's a lot to appreciate, and I'm excited to dive into it today for this horror video essay. And if you guys haven't seen Vampyr, it's available on HBO Max, and something that's really interesting about this movie is that there isn't one full cohesive cut of the movie. Most of it has been lost, and when you watch it on HBO Max, it tells you that. So that's why when you watch the movie, the audio changes and there's some weird cuts in places, because literally there's not a cohesive cut of the movie. So let's get started talking about Vampyr. Vampyr is, in my opinion, a cinematic horror achievement. Horror is all about developing an atmosphere where the audience is put on edge, ultimately scaring them, and this 1932 film still manages to unease audiences nearly 90 years later. The reason it manages to do that is that the movie understands how to balance ambiguity within its plot in a way that attracts the audience to the story but at the same time will terrify them. To begin with, the film opens with an eerie location. Our protagonist, Alan Gray, arrives at a secluded inn where all sort of weird occurrences are already happening, and I think placing our protagonist in a way that the weird things are happening makes it even scarier because you're already questioning things from the moment the movie begins. When knocking on windows, the lights turn off, no one seems to be answering the door, and there's a man outside with a scythe ringing a bell, and all of these items are used in almost every single horror movie. There's many close-ups of paintings, and the paintings in the room Gray is staying at also offer suspense. Every single thing that the camera wants to focus on is important, and I think that's what makes a good filmmaker a great one, because he doesn't just show things to show them, but they actually mean certain things. In these paintings, we see people weeping in despair, and there's a skeleton with them. Vampyr opening in a way that offers no safety indicates that this will be a terrifying journey for both Alan Gray and the audience watching. The sound design in Vampyr adds a lot to the haunting energy as well. Creepy sounds loom throughout, such as a score, but also with noises like clapping, random doors opening, and more. And the sound design paired with confusing lines of dialogue makes Vampyr be a film that uses several horror conventions still used today. When the old man comes into Alan Gray's room and writes, "To be opened upon my death," after saying the cryptic message, "She must not die," it reminds me a lot of modern A24 horror movies, particularly Midsommar. Alan Gray seems to be a character that just stumbled on the situation and got involved despite its malevolent nature. The protagonist in Midsommar, Danny, had several scenes where guests from the cult in the film come in to tell her something that did not make any sense at the moment, but later on did. And upon rewatch, it also makes more sense, and that's why I think I enjoyed Vampyr more on my rewatch, because things that were said made a lot more sense and were more clear, whereas the first time I was like, I feel like that was put in there for no reason, but in fact, it wasn't there for no reason. It actually added a lot to the greater picture and scheme of things. This is a popular horror trope that is used in most, if not all, horror movies, where elderly or wise characters give information that make it creepy, but also provide insight for what is to come. And the reason why this works in horror movies, and especially in Vampyr, is that the film takes advantage of the fear of the unknown. And as the movie progresses, scenes get weirder and things do not make sense, and as an audience, we fear what is to come and are unnerved by not fully understanding concepts. Usually in movies, as the plot thickens and all of that, we start to kind of tie the pieces together. But what's really interesting about Vampyr is that doesn't really happen in the movie. It starts getting weirder and weirder, and you almost understand less as things keep on going. And I think that concept itself of switching what our brains are normally used to is so terrifying. And I wonder what the audience reception was in 1932, because at the time that this movie was made, there was a big deal with Dracula, and this movie is actually based off a collection of short stories, especially Carmilla, who is a vampire that is often referenced and inspired many horror stories. So there was definitely an intrigue in the 30s, but I still think this is something that definitely might have freaked people out, because as I was watching it, I was really unnerved to this day, because I'm like, what is even happening in this movie? There's a lot of moments throughout the film where scenes are intercut with each other that feel out of order, and this works to evoke terror. As Alan Gray is walking, many times the editor cuts to a close-up of an angel-looking sign, or I don't even know what that sign was, but if you've seen the movie, it happens many times. And there are also several cuts to a shadow of a person digging a grave, and there's an emphasis on shadows in Vampyr, such as shadows of a cross, wheels, people dancing, Alan Gray's shadow, mysterious people, and many more. Shadows are particularly terrifying because we don't actually get to see what is fully happening, just the dark reflection of a certain event or scene taking place. And what makes it even scarier is that the director never chose to show us the other side of the shadows. So the audience is left to believe that these shadows are dancing on their own, like ghosts. And darkness is used heavily in the film, and it's an advantage that it's in black and white because it makes scenes feel creepier. That whole emphasis on the shadows is something that I think is so interesting in this movie. I love that the director never panned to show us people dancing. We were just left with this still image of these shadows dancing, and we couldn't even make up what they looked like, which is really, really interesting. But to continue with the plot, after the old man leaves, Alan Gray wakes up and goes to another location, which is the castle, and this is the place that the shadows guided him to. The corners are dark, and most of the time the only light sources comes from candles or dim light. There are close-ups of skeletons throughout, and as Gray walks around, the rooms are full of random items we consider horrifying, like small skeletons, old walls, and cobwebs. And suddenly, this old man in the film dies. This is the same old man that gave Gray the note that read, "To be opened upon my death." Now, at this moment in the film, the audience learns a lot. Gray finds the book and begins reading about vampires. It is a moment when both Gray and the audience sees the parallels between what is happening in real life and what the book talks about. There's many close-ups of the pages in the book, and this helps show its importance, but also have the audience know as much information as our protagonist, because up until this point, we know just as much as our characters in the movie, which is something really interesting that I always love when horror movies do. Words that pop up in the book include words like vampire, vampire, demon, souls of the dead, prince of darkness, and these close-ups reminded me a lot yet again of A24 movies, specifically Midsommar, because there is an important relic in that film, Midsommar, and in that scene there's a character that reads it and starts to connect the dots of what is going on. And then in another horror movie, The Evil Dead, from a few years later, there's an ancient book in that movie, and that book is really important to the film because it helps the characters and the audience understand what's happening. And although I think Vampyr takes advantage of the fear of the unknown, I think having these close-ups of the books confirming these creatures to be true is also easily as terrifying, because now we know that there's genuinely something looming around. It's not something that's just in Alan Gray's head, but the audience is also knowing that there's actually a force that's messing here with them, which is easily as terrifying as not knowing anything. Ultimately, I think Vampyr works really great as a film from the 30s, and it works really great in horror movies and studying it because it normalized uneasiness in horror films. The editing style resembles what a lot of artsy modern horror films do, such as A24 movies. The fast cuts, scenes out of order, disorientations are all traits that Vampyr has, but these traits also inspired several movies today and normalized horror filmmaking and editing as we know it. This type of horror is more psychological. It wants its audiences to think and have the terrifying images stay in their head. Without Vampyr, a lot of the popular tropes we consider horror tropes would simply not exist, or maybe not come to play as they do now. Even down to how the main character, Alan Gray, is investigating and going towards the danger is something that happens in almost every horror movie, and it shows how influential an early horror film truly was. This film, in my opinion, is a cinematic achievement with its original and psychological themes that freak audiences out to this day. And I hope you guys enjoyed me talking about Vampyr today. I'm excited to tackle more classic horror from back in the day. I will be talking about another 30s horror movie very soon in a 31 Nights of Horror video. And if you guys haven't seen Vampyr, I highly recommend watching watching it. I think it's really important to study films like Vampyr, especially if you like horror. So thank you guys so much for watching today's video essay, and if you guys want to see more video essays, let me know down below because I've missed making them, and I'm excited that I got to make one today for 31 Nights of Horror. And that's gonna be all for me today, everyone. I hope you have a very nice and spooky afternoon, and if you have not subscribed to my channel, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, everyone.